Variables and objects in PowerShells, they're an integral part of PowerShell. They are just as valuable and as useful as important as commandlets. Actually, in many cases, I find that I use variables and objects in PowerShell in many of my scripts more than I actually use commandlets. I tend to use commandlets to grab a subset of data, and then the rest of it is in variables and objects, and then I might use commandlets to manipulate those variables and objects. They're highly important. I hope you enjoy this presentation from Log Analysis Made Easy, also known as LAME Creations. Let's jump right on in. So the first thing to know is variables are a container, and they store a value of an object or an object, and they can contain all different types. They can include text, and then in the computer world, text is referred to as strings, numbers, which are referred to as integers, doubles, things like that, or an actual object. And the basic principle is you declare a variable, and it's as simple to declare a variable as putting the $ and then some name. Whatever that name is, that's the variable name, and then you use an equal sign, and then you put what it's going to equal afterwards. Numbers do not need to be in quotes. Strings must be in quotes. If you do not put a quote there, it will be an error. And then to pull out the contents, to see the contents, all you have to do is write the $ myString. Now for the examples here, I'm going to use my Ubuntu box, and I'm going to use terminal, and I'm going to use PowerShell in that terminal. I'm doing that not because I need to use it in Linux. One of the things I'm trying to show with this channel is how the things you use, PowerShell is not just a programming language for Windows. It is the most amazing tool for Windows system administration, but it also has value in other operating systems. PowerShell is now open source, and that is why I want to show it. There's a Linux can natively run PowerShell, and let's do our stuff in PowerShell and show how PowerShell can be used to do these very things inside Linux. So let's talk about variables using my terminal and PowerShell. In order to get to PowerShell, all I had to do was type pwsh. I can now see that my terminal is running PowerShell right there. And I'm going to write some string variable equals hello world. Does not do anything when I press enter. The reason being is all it's doing is it's assigning this hello world into the some string variable. So let's see the value there. And remember, tab completion is your friend. It will tab complete, and boom, I can write hello world. If I want to overwrite the value, I want to make it equal to something else, I just write the same thing again, and this time I'm going to write my new name. Press that, and the variable has been assigned something different. So that is how to use create a variable. A variable can have any name, just needs to pretty much start with a $. There are a very few set of variables that cannot work. For example, true, false are reserved names. The PS version table, there are a few things, variables have already been assigned and you're not allowed to use them. But as a general rule, $ and then some word single word, you can't put spaces in there. You can use camel notation or underscores or things like that. But you gotta be otherwise, that's all you have to do to make a variable. Remember, I talked about quotation marks, and there is a difference between a string and an integer. An int, as they're usually referred to. Integers are numbers, strings are words. So let's see that in practice. We're going to assign a variable to A and to B, and we're going to put them in quotes, and we're going to go see what happens when we do math on them. And yes, you can do math right in your command line. And so if I do $A equals 1, $B equals 2, write that, $B, that works. So if I do $A plus $B, what do we think the value would be? If we're doing math, it's going to be equal to 3. It's not. If you read this, you're going to actually think it's equal to 12. You know, how is it equal to 12? It's not. It actually concatenated. It took 1 and 2 and put them next to each other. Showing that principle, I'm going to go B equals 1, 2, 3. And now if I do $A plus B, I should get 1, 1, 2, 3. And that's what I get. So it's important to recognize that this is a string. Strings do not behave quite the same way as integers. Let's do something different, and I go C equals 1, 2. Now if I go C plus D, it should be equal to 3. The difference was the quotations. The quotations make things strings. And so just be aware that if you want something to be a string, you put it in quotes. If you want it to be an integer, it should not be in quotes. And so I've demonstrated that this here and this here come out to two different results. There is another thing you can do. By default, PowerShell does not use strong casting. Strong casting means this variable is a string. It can only take strings. This variable is an integer. It can only take integers. By default, PowerShell will read whatever you assign to it and try to come up with the best thing it can come up with. So showing that in principle, I have C and D. It's determined that those are integers. A and B are strings. If I go this way, $A equals 10. Now I go $A plus $C. It realized, oh, you assigned a 10. This is an integer, so it flipped it. And it is now, this thing is actually an integer. And so that is weak casting. It allows you to change your variables. It's really powerful, but at the same time, it can get you in problems. And so sometimes you want to strong cast, meaning I want my values to be an integer, and they will always be an integer no matter what you do. And so to see that, strong casting is using brackets. And so that's a strong cast for an integer. And I'm going to go, this equals 1. Just to give a point here. Based off our previous example, this would become a string, but I strong casted it, and watch what happens. Plus C. If the strong casting works and it maintains itself as an integer, we'll get one result. And that's exactly what we got. It did not concatenate them together. And so that's the power of strong casting. No matter what the user puts in, it will cast it to the right type, and thereby you won't be broken. That's a really important thing when you take, a lot of time we can show how you can ask input from the user in your script. And if it's like a number, PowerShell might misinterpret that and put it as a string, and then it will mess up all your rest of your stuff. But if you strong cast your variables, they will always stay what you tell them to be. Strong casting is a very powerful tool. Just quickly show strong casting for string, integer, Boolean, and you'll notice that this says $true. That's because the Boolean is true or false. That's what a bool means. And the way to call true is with a $true, $false. You don't write the word true or false in there. All right, so that is the general principle behind variables. Now we're going to talk about another thing. We've got variables, and then we have properties inside variables, and we want to know what's in there. Objects can contain attributes, properties, and methods, and if we want to see them, we have this really cool command, getMember. I've talked about getHelp. The next one of the most powerful commands is getMember, and getMember will tell you all the properties and attributes you have inside that variable. And so let's look at that. We're going to use a new example. I'm going to put my new variable equals getDate. GetDate is a commandlet that pulls back the current time and date. So if I write my new variable, we can see that the time it just displays a nice little timestamp for us. Now what we're going to do is we're going to pipe that variable into getMember. And when we run it, we're going to get back a whole bunch of information. Best thing to do is go all the way to the top right after you run it, and you will see that this variable is now a system.datetime. Honestly, this you don't need to read, just need to read the last thing after the dot. It's a date time field. And let's go run $A. If we run that through, we'll notice it is an int 32. Don't worry about the int 32, it's int is an int, it's an integer. And we should know, if we remember what B is, B was that quotes 2. We notice it's a string. So we can pass any variable in here and get back this information about it using getMember. So let's dive a little more into that. What else do we have? We have all of the methods and properties that you can use inside them. In order to use them, you use a period, a dot notation, in order to be able to use them. So for example, if I want to add years to my date, there's a little command there, add years, add ticks, add seconds, add months. I can change things from this to decimal, to double, to int, to string. I can pull out a date. I can get the day of the week, day of the year. So let's try that. Let's use some of these days. My new variable. I can make this work. My new variable. And I'm going to write dot day. It's going to come back and say it's the 3rd day. And that's based off the timestamp. Where did the 3rd come from? December 3rd. I can go dot second. And if I have that right, it should come back as 24. Yep, it grabbed the second right there. What if I want to do some math to this? We had up here, add time to it. So I'm going to add years to my field. So I'm going to go my new variable, add years. And I'll just put 5 in there. And all of a sudden you notice we've moved to 2027. Boy, time sure flies. And so this allows you to manipulate variables, and getMember shows you that. I did this, I want to show that you can also assign things to Cmdlets. So we're going to do some process equals get process. Now I write some process out. And I'm going to get back all the get process values. But what's cool now is because this variable has been assigned the get process, let's look at this. Some process, get member, we will see that it is a type system diagnostic process. It's a process. It's not a string, it's not an int, it's a process. And from that means we have access to all of these properties. And so I can do some process dot name. You can tab complete. I got a name, a non-page system, npm. I'm going to use name. And now I get back all the names. I can use CPU. I'm going to get back all the CPUs. And so this, what was in Linux as a string, Linux works with strings. This is now an object with properties and values and things like that that you can manipulate and use however you'd like. It is a great, powerful tool to pull stuff back and pull out the things you want instead of having to regex, sec, sed, awk, grep, those commands from bash to manipulate your strings. You can flat out just use them as objects. It has taken the object-oriented approach of Windows and it's applying it into the Linux world. This already exists in Windows, so don't worry about it. It's not as big of a deal, but it's a great migration over to Linux world and helping things become a lot easier to manipulate and use. And at the same time, you still have the other commands. You can still use bash and awk and grep and set to manipulate stuff. But PowerShell allows you to now put it into objects and manipulate them as objects. I hope this is helpful. I hope you can see the value. We'll quickly show that last slide here. But the concept is you can use properties of an object with the period. So for example, in my date command here, we can get the year, add years, etc. I hope this video was helpful to you. I hope you can see, get an idea of how variables and properties can be a powerful tool within PowerShell as we go forward. We are definitely going to be using them a lot more in our scripts, and I'll start using them, and I'll have the time to keep explaining what they are. So I hope this video was helpful. If it is, please give me a thumbs up. I'd love it if you subscribe to the channel, and I hope this helps improve your PowerShell usage around your home and your work.